Donald Trump's police state. Welcome to Law and Society. Please subscribe and let this serve as a warning. This is a warning. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to read you two executive orders that Donald Trump signed on April 28th, 2025. And this is the beginning of Donald Trump establishing a police state. After I read you, I want you to prepare accordingly. I want you to be prepared, have a constitution, read the Constitution, know that warrantless searches upon yourself and your property is illegal. Administrative warrants have limits, and you have the right to read them to see what they are asking for. And if they need to go into somebody's home after executing an administrative warrant that did not get the job done of removing somebody, you get a judicial warrant from an Article 3 judge. Without that, you have a right under the Constitution of not being seized unreasonably or searched unreasonably. You also have a right to due process. You have a right to an attorney. You have a right to notice and process and day in court and your defense, your day to be heard. You have a right to counsel. You have a right not to be put in cruel and unusual environments like the Gulag in El Salvador and in internment camps in Texas. So, with the backdrop of the internment camp in El Salvador, CICOT, and the expanding internment camps in Texas, with knowledge that Donald Trump has now already removed American citizens illegally from the United States, let alone undocumented people or visa holders, student visa holders, green card holders, people who are about to take immigration tests. He's targeting these people on arbitrary and capricious basis without any due process of law or showing of fact in a court. No notice to these people. So, I'm going to read you these two executive orders, and then I want you to think carefully about what I just said. Also, I'm going to comment as I read about these documents. So the first one is protecting American communities from criminal aliens. By the authority vested in me as President by the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America, it is hereby ordered, then Section 1, federal supremacy with respect to immigration, national security, and foreign policy is axiomatic. The Constitution provides the federal government will with plenary authority regarding immigration to protect the sovereignty of our nation and to conduct relations with other nations who must be able to deal with one national government on such matters. So he's already this is talking about, the power that he is drawing this emergency, this executive order from is the immigration and national security and foreign policy playground. Well, he is also depriving people, and we will see, in action, he's depriving people of due process of law in doing what he is calling protecting communities from criminal aliens. This power is sometimes contained in specific constitutional provisions. Article 2 of the Constitution vests the power to protect national security and conduct foreign policy in the President of the United States. And Article 4, Section 4 requires the federal government to protect each of the states against invasion. So the Alien Enemies Act, the invasion by Tren de Aragua, these were the foundations being built upon which a police state is going to stand. This federal power over immigration is also an inherent element of national sovereignty. Yes, granted, but it is not part of the president's powers to deprive people of due process. That remains the law of the land. That's the Constitution, as much as it is the constitutional power of the president in cases of protecting the United States against invasion. Prior to the administration allowed unchecked millions of aliens to illegally enter the United States, the resulting public safety and national security risks are exacerbated by the presence of and control of territory by international cartels and other transnational criminal organizations along the southern border, as well as terrorists and other malign actors who intend to harm the United States and the American people. This invasion at the southern border requires the federal government to take measures to fulfill its obligations to the United States. So, where is the public safety? Is the presence of, in the territory of international cartels, transnational criminal organizations? Where? You have to prove that, right? You can't just state that in an executive order as the premise for you to invoke all these powers just by stating this is happening. Where is the evidence? Where are the investigations? Where are the people who are being caught? Where are the criminals who are invading? And if you're saying you're catching them and putting them in detention or sending them away to El Salvador, why is it that you're not providing them due process of law, over which you don't have any power, Mr. President? They have to be afforded due process of law. Yet some states and local officials nevertheless continue to use their authority to violate, obstruct, and defy the enforcement of federal immigration laws. This is a lawless insurrection against the supremacy of the federal law and federal government's obligation to defend the territorial sovereignty of the United States. Beyond the intolerable national security risks, such as nullification efforts often violate federal criminal laws, including those prohibiting obstruction of justice, unlawfully harboring of or hiring illegal aliens, conspiracy against the United States, and conspiracy to impede the federal law enforcement. Now, mind you, this is still premised on the fact that this is an immigration matter and not a due process matter. If you are taking these away, if you're collaborating and taking these steps collaboratively with the court system and doing due process as due process is due, then there won't be any problem. But you are choosing to usurp the judicial process completely. Beyond intolerable national security risks, such nullification, okay, I've read that part. Some measures to assist illegal aliens also necessarily violate federal laws prohibiting discrimination against Americans in favor of illegal aliens and protecting Americans' civil rights. It is an imperative that the government restore the enforcement of U.S. law. That is how they are premising this executive order, as an emergency, as there being an invasion, as there being international cartels present by the border. This has not been, by the way, not evidenced by any sort of investigation that has been conducted or results of which have been provided to Congress or to any judicial court, Article 3 court, in the course of any investigation of these people who they are detaining and illegally removing, to prove that they're part of these gangs, or prove that they're part of an invasion, or prove that they're part of a concerted effort by an external force to do something bad to the United States. Section 2, designation of sanctuary jurisdictions. So he now formalizes what he has said for quite some time about called places that have been places that shield the targeted victims from a weaponized federal government. Within 30 days of the date of this order, the Attorney General, in coordination with the Secretary of Homeland Security, shall publish a list of states and local jurisdictions that obstruct the enforcement of federal criminal laws, federal immigration laws, sanctuary jurisdictions. That's what they're going to call them. After its initial publication, the Attorney General and the DHS Secretary shall update this list as necessary. Immediately following this, each publication under Section A, AG and DHS Secretary shall notify each sanctuary jurisdiction regarding its defiance of federal immigration enforcement and potential violations of federal criminal law. Consequences. With respect to sanctuary jurisdictions that are designated under 2A of this order, the head of each department, executive department, or agency, in coordination with the Director of Office of Management and Budget, and as permitted, by the way, Office of Management and Budget, run by Russell Vought, the person who was one of the architects of Project 2025, and as permitted by law, shall identify appropriate federal funds to sanctuary jurisdictions, including grants and contracts for suspension or termination as appropriate. The executive branch does not have the power to take away from any jurisdiction, state or local, federally appropriated funds that were legislated to be given to those jurisdictions. And if they're part of grants provided by previous administrations, the question is up in the air because the money was specifically appropriated by Congress for those projects specifically. With respect to jurisdiction that remains sanctuary jurisdiction after state and local officials are provided notice of such status and yet retained in defiance of federal law, the Attorney General and DHS Secretary shall pursue all necessary legal remedies and enforcement measures to end these violations and bring such jurisdictions into compliance with the United States. This section is overbroad and vague. I don't know what you're talking about using all necessary legal and enforcement measures. What are you talking about? Usurping state law where federal law doesn't really invade into unless there is a direct conflict when the Supremacy Clause comes into play. But here the premise is that we are superior, despite the fact that this executive order talks about its own legal validity under the Constitution. It ignores the legal validity of the constitutional protections afforded to the people they detain. The constitutional protections against Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, Sixth Amendment, and Eighth Amendment. Those violations, they're not looking at. Those are the violations that are important for us to look at when we are fighting against this weaponized White House and the orders coming out of it. Preventing legal benefits for aliens in sanctuary jurisdictions. The Secretary of Homeland Security, in coordination with the AG, shall develop guidance rules or other appropriate mechanisms to ensure appropriate eligibility verification is conducted for individuals receiving federal public benefits within the meaning of 8 U.S.C. 1611C from private entities in a sanctuary jurisdiction, whether such verification is conducted by a private entity or by a government entity on its behalf. So privatizing how to penalize sanctuary jurisdictions about these benefits that people are receiving. Equal treatment of Americans. The AG and DHS Secretary will identify and take appropriate actions to stop the enforcement of state and local laws, regulations, policies, and practices favoring aliens over any groups of American citizens that are unlawful, preempted by federal law, or otherwise unenforceable, including state laws that provide in-state higher education tuition to aliens but not to out-of-state American citizens that may violate 8 U.S.C. 1623 or that favor aliens in criminal charges or sentencing. So here we have certain protections that states, mind you, the way that federal law works is that the Constitution provides the baseline. After that, states are allowed to build on that baseline and provide more protection to the residents of their states and then their localities, as long as it doesn't contravene the Constitution. So, talking about these targeting state and local laws that give certain, like DACA recipients or people who are undocumented, certain advantages, meaning giving them allowance into the public education programs, that itself is what they're going to target and threaten the states with. So you should call your representatives, state representatives and senators and local leaders, and warn them that this is coming. This is targeting the jurisdictions that will hold up a person's right to due process of law, a person's right against unreasonable searches and seizures, a person's right to counsel, not a citizen's right. It's a person's right. Nothing in this order shall be construed to impair or otherwise affect the authority or grant of the executive department or agency or head thereof, or the functions of the direction of office and budget management. Order shall be implemented consistent with applicable law. This order is not intended to create the right or benefits substantive or procedural enforceable at law or in equity by any party against the United States, its departments. The Department of Justice shall provide funding for this order's publication in the National Registrar. Well, the last part too, shall provide funding. Department of Justice doesn't provide funding. Congress does. So whether this operation will be funded should not and must not depend on this executive order, because Congress appropriates funds. You see the problem with the order? Here and there you see, vague and overbroad. Here you see unconstitutional misappropriation of funds. This Department of Justice doesn't have the power to provide funding for this order's publication in the Federal Registrar, or for funding any of the measures that are implemented in this executive order. Department of Justice just doesn't have the funding. It's Congress who has to do the funding. So I'll quickly go over to the next one. This one is called the Strengthening and Unleashing America's Law Enforcement to Pursue Criminals and Protect Innocent Victims. Quick drink of water. This has been a long episode. Thank you for sticking around, or you can go and read these orders by yourself. They are scary as hell to me, and they should be scary as hell to everybody. And somehow it has not reached the top of the news. And not that I'm so incredibly vain to think that me reading this out to anybody is going to get attention. But the point is that I have a duty to warn. And I've had this duty to warn for quite some time, and I've been doing this. And I see this as a development of a police state by the Executive Department of the United States. And it's a huge red flag. So reading this second one, Strengthening and Unleashing America's Law Enforcement to Pursue Criminals and Protect Innocent Citizens. By the authority vested in me as president by the United States, by the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America, it is hereby ordered. Safe communities rely on the backbone and the heroism of a tough and well-equipped police force. My administration is steadfastly committed to empowering state and local law enforcement to firmly police dangerous criminal behavior and protect innocent citizens. When local leaders demonize law enforcement and impose legal and political handcuffs that make aggressive enforcing the law impossible, crime thrives and innocent citizens and small businesses or business owners suffer. My administration will therefore establish best practices that the state and local levels for cities to unleash high-impact local police forces, protect and defend law enforcement officers wrongly accused and abused by state or local officials. So indemnifying and helping the people who the state says that they broke the law, those who he's calling high impact police officers, wrongly accused by state and local officials. Well, you don't have the power to just say that they were wrongly accused and somehow they're going to be free from any sort of state sanction that they have been levied. And surge resources to officers in need. Where's the resource going to come from? Congress hasn't appropriated that resource. Remember that. My administration will work to ensure that law enforcement officers across America focus on ending crime, not pursuing harmful, illegal, race and sex-based equity policies. What's the relationship between following the law and also following these equity policies that are part of state and local laws? They don't contravene the Constitution. There's nowhere in the Constitution that says you shall not provide these policies that are meant to protect certain protected classes that the Supreme Court has also held as protected classes, if for nothing else, by rational basis scrutiny. So they are still liberties that need to be guarded by our law and order, by our enforcement branches. The result will be a law-abiding society in which tenacious law enforcement officers protect the innocent violations of law not tolerated, and American communities are safely enjoyed by all their citizens again. Talking about citizens over and over again, while the Constitution talks about rights that are based on persons. And mind you, I don't know if you are, like, if you watch television or not, or I watch these, like Daredevil, Born Again. Like, if you watch the first season and see how Kingpin takes over as mayor of New York and then establishes his renegade police force, this is what that first section sounds like to me. And this is an executive order that came out on the 28th of April 2025. This is what Donald Trump and Pam Bondi and Kash Patel and Dan Bongino are going to solidify, and we are going to see what the impact of that is going to be. There are certain sections that are important. So, legal defense of law enforcement officers. So, protect the AG shall take all appropriate action to create a mechanism to provide legal resources and indemnification to law enforcement officers who unjustly incur expenses and liabilities for actions taken during the performance of their duties to enforce the law. This mechanism shall include the use of private sector pro bono assistance for such law enforcement officers. This mechanism shall include the use of private sector pro bono assistance for such law enforcement officers. You know what my mind goes to first? The Proud Boys, the 3%ers, the Oath Keepers, and any other militia that will want to participate in this sort of invasion into the United States. So That's an important. This mechanism shall include the use of private sector pro bono assistance for such law enforcement officers. God, that's scary to hear. Attorney General and other appropriate heads of executive departments and agencies will take appropriate actions to maximize the use of federal resources to provide new best practices to state and local law enforcement to aggressively police communities against all crimes, expand access to improve the quality of training available to state and local law enforcement, increase pay and benefits to law enforcement officers, bribe them in a way, indemnify them, immunize them, strengthen and expand legal protections of these law enforcement officers, seek enhanced sentences for crimes against law enforcement officers. That's the one thing that makes sense. Promote investment in the security and capacity of prisons, and increase the investment in and collection, distribution, and uniformity of crime data across jurisdictions. I mean, you're going to federalize the state criminal system as well. You're going to go after and federalize local law enforcement. Then it says just blatantly, using national security assets for law and order within 90 days of the date of this order. So the next 100 days is going to be a lot of hearing about this sort of thing happening and developing. The AG and the Secretary of Defense. Now it's about the Secretary of Defense. The previous one was about the Secretary and Homeland Security, remember. This is about the Secretary of Defense. So you're going to the military. In consultation with the Secretary of Homeland Security, so she's still there, Kristi Noem, you need a little bit garnish of cruelty, and heads of agencies as appropriate, shall increase the, by the way, by saying that it becomes overbroad and vague, shall increase the provision of excess military and national security assets in local jurisdictions to assist state and local law enforcement. So you're bringing the military down onto American civilian streets. You put that in an executive order, and that's still, the New York Times and the Washington Post reported on it, but it hasn't been a big thing on social media. People aren't already talking about it. They aren't getting like really scared that they should be. Within 90 days of this order, Secretary of Defense, in coordination with the Attorney General, shall determine how military and national security assets, training, non-lethal capabilities, and personnel can most effectively be utilized to prevent crime. Crime being whatever Donald Trump says it is. Takes him back to the time when, during the protests of the George Floyd protests in D.C., he was recommending that protesters be shot with rubber bullets. Remember, rubber bullets are supposed to be non-lethal. So it's not a coincidence that non-lethal shows up here again. It's just like, for me, it's this should scare the living daylights out of people who are out there speaking truth to power. And what this is doing, I hope this doesn't chill, but it raises the temperature and people get out on the streets and make sure you protest peacefully on public property. Protest peacefully. Honor time, place, manner restrictions. Get your permits. Have your copy of permits with every single person who is leading the rally and other point people in the rally. Have your legal protections when you are going out to protest. Know that you have the right to peaceably protest, but know that there are time, place, manner restrictions that the government and local jurisdictions can put on you by saying you cannot do it at this time, at this place, or in this way, whatever the restriction may be. And that's sort of broad, but if you ask for permits to demonstrate on public property and parks, those authorities should be able to give you, unless you're just going to have to march down the street in mass, because that's the only other way that you can stop this from happening. Because you have to be protesting and being absolutely nonviolent and following the law when you are protesting peacefully what is going to happen. Because that is like the time when I think Donald Trump will invoke any sort of martial law power. This is the premise for it. But these executive orders themselves are like pre-martial law setup orders. Holding state and local officials accountable. The AG The AG shall pursue all necessary legal remedies and enforcement measures to enforce the rights of Americans impacted by crime, and shall prioritize prosecution of any applicable violation of federal criminal law with respect to state and local jurisdictions whose officials willfully and unlawfully direct the obstruction of criminal law, including by directly and unlawfully prohibiting law enforcement officers from carrying out duties necessary by public safety and law enforcement, or unlawfully engage in discrimination or civil rights violations under the guise of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives that restrict law enforcement activity or endanger citizens. So you have to put in there that we are also at war with race and sex and that diversity. And if you provide women and people of other races any sort of benefit of the doubt that you regularly provide to your white citizens, then there's a problem. The whole problem of diversity and inequity and diversity, equity, and inclusion is that our country has a history of no diversity, white supremacy, inequity, slavery, and exclusion, whether that be Native Americans, African Americans, or women. That's the history. And that's why those policies remain. And mind you, this is not law, this is executive order, but we need to pay attention. And I'm almost done. Use of Homeland Security task forces. Now we have the federal government coming into the states. Attorney General and Secretary of Homeland Security shall utilize the Homeland Security Task Force formed in accordance with Executive Order 14159 on January 20th, protecting the American people against invasion. What invasion? He has not been able to substantiate anywhere that there's a fact finder, to coordinate and advance the objectives of this order. And then there's the general provisions about, Department of Justice shall provide the funding for order publication of the registrar. Again, same thing as the last executive order. But do you feel safe in your communities now that in the next 60 and the next 90 days, Donald Trump is directing whichever state officials will comply with giving them unfettered powers, and there will be violations of your due process rights? They have already gone into homes of a home of a due process an American family, all of whom are citizens, ransacked their homes. They have already sent children who are American citizens out of the country. They've already arrested green card holders, detained green card holders, and continue to detain green card holders. They are going after student visas. They're picking up tourists who have visas, visiting visas. And now we have the federal government coming into states and localities to tell them what to do by the power vested in him of having law and of maintaining law and order. And to protect Americans from criminals and protecting Americans from race-based policies like diversity, inclusion, and equity. He's now bringing the police into it, people. He's now bringing the police into it. And we need to pay attention. That's why I spend the last 35 minutes reading this to you. Or just go down to the description box if you get tired of hearing my voice and click on those links and read them by yourself. They're not very long. It just took me long because I was also punctuating that with commentary. But go ahead and read them and see the parts that pop up to you. And put them in the comment box if you see anything in those writings that pop up to you that did not pop up to me. But that's where we are. And people need to talk about this. People in law enforcement need to talk about this. People in the government need to talk about this. People who are podcasting need to talk about this. Everybody needs to talk about this. Local politicians and state politicians should talk about this. And they need to push back against it as much as they can and make sure that the line between the sovereignty of states and the federal government is not irreparably breached by this invasion of the federal government into state jurisdictions. Be very careful. And by the way, this order is also broad and overbroad and vague. So, like, the constitutionality of what is being said here is also in question. With that said, thank you for listening for so long. Please stay tuned, like and subscribe, and do share, or at least share those links with people so they can read the executive orders. With that said, take care.